This happened a couple years ago when I was 16. It was a warm summer night. At nights like these, me and my friend would often go grab a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of beer each, and go outside to enjoy them. We come from a really small town where everybody is somehow connected, so the only way for us to drink and smoke without our parents knowing was to do so in secluded places. Luckily, the town is surrounded by huge forests. We were both very familiar with them since we practically grew up there. This one time, it was night as usual. We both grabbed our forbidden contraband, some flashlights, and we headed out. We took the path through the long meadow, which ended at the edge of the forest. From there, it led a path through the forest, by which it's a 20-minute walk back to the town in steep downhill terrain. At the place where the meadow and the forest meet, there is a gazebo with a fireplace where people go for picnics. As we were walking through the meadow, we would stop a few times to ensure from afar that the gazebo was unoccupied. It was around 11 p.m. and the night was incredibly dark. Even though we were out in the open, we had to use our flashlights to see anything. When we made sure that the air was clear, we approached the gazebo to light our first cigarette. We were both just standing there, puffing and talking, while always scouting our surroundings with the beams of our flashlights. After maybe 5 minutes, we decided to take the path through the forest back to town. We walked about 30 meters, at which point we couldn't see the place where we were previously standing. That's when we heard it. From the gazebo, where we were standing just seconds earlier, came a long, terrifying scream. It sounded as if somebody, a man by the sound of it, was being cut to pieces while still very much alive. The kind of scream that turns your blood to ice instantly. After the first scream, there was a pause for a few seconds. During this time, we were both so scared that we couldn't even move. Then it started again, even louder and more terrifying. The second scream snapped us back to reality, and without a word, we just started sprinting through the rough terrain, not once looking back. At this point, I was so pumped up with adrenaline that I couldn't hear anything except my own heartbeat resonating in my ears. We've never ran that fast before, and we didn't stop until we reached the lights of town. When we finally did, we both just sat on a sidewalk under a lamppost, panting and gasping for air. Nobody said anything for a good 30 minutes. After a while, we started talking about it. We came up with the conclusion that either somebody was having fun at our expense, or somebody really got hurt. At the end, we decided to head back there the first thing in the morning. But surprise, surprise, no signs of anyone being injured or anyone struggling. We decided that it was just someone playing pranks on us. However, to this day it keeps gnawing at me. Something just doesn't add up. We were standing there for quite some time, so the person must have been very well hidden. On the other hand, it would be almost impossible for anyone to just walk in there without any light, since it was so dark. And even if he had some kind of torch, we would certainly spot him. Anyway, screaming man in the forest, let's not meet. I live in the Pacific Northwest in a pretty small town, about an hour from Seattle. Really close to my home is an enormous state forest. For my birthday, my dad suggested that we go for a hike in that forest. I was uneasy at first because this forest does have somewhat of a history. There is illegal business here, and the majority of it is in that state forest, because it isn't anyone's real jurisdiction. Basically, you should hope you aren't spotted as a witness to drug operations or illegal logging. To make matters worse, the forest is used as a dumping ground as well as a remote site to commit murders. The murders don't really exceed one every 3 to 4 years though. The ones that happen in the forest are generally drug related, while the bodies dumped there vary in motive. 2 of which are believed to be victims of Ted Bundy, by the way. There is also a minimum security corrections center in the south end of the forest. So on an early spring weekend, I went for a day hike with my dad. How did this even happen? My dad managed to convince me that we're in no danger because no one is already after us for anything. There's no motive, and by extension, no reason for alarm. And the forest is giant. The odds are low. Going in the overcast and rainy off-season, we knew there should be no foot or motor traffic, which is nice. We started out in the southeastern portion, walking through the occasional clear cut, but after the first mile, we moved into dense forest. There wasn't much to see, and it was terribly muddy. I had little to distract me but the sound of my own footsteps, until I heard other footsteps. The footsteps were loud and deliberate, as a human's would be, but there weren't more hikers. They were coming from the trees above. I was uncomfortable, but also armed with a hunting knife. I decided it was probably an animal, despite seeing none or even hearing birds. But a short while later, I heard low-sounding voices. This I could only think. If I don't bother them, they won't bother me. So I tried to forget it. I am cursed with incredibly good hearing though, making it hard to get rid of my suspicions. Walking on, we passed a seemingly still body of water to the left. It was weird. It connected to a creek on both sides, but it was large and unmoving, like a pond. Additionally, there was no life of any kind. No fish, hardly any plants, but brown algae and thick yellow grass. On the right, the forest was ridiculously dense, with a few spur trails that disappear into it within a few feet. All of it a bit weird, but not suspicious. We kept walking to a small waterfall about 100 feet ahead. My dad had become busy taking pictures. I surveyed the area and turned around, looking back at the trail. Then I saw him. In the distance, a tall, lanky man in grungy-looking clothing practically leapt out from the side of the trail with the pond, and in another bound, across the trail into the trees on the other side. I assume he continued down a spur trail to who knows where. It was so quick that I didn't even react. I saw him, and he was gone into the trees. My dad decided that we should head back after taking a sufficient amount of pictures, and as we headed down, there was a small organized pile of fern leaves in the center of the trail, pointed in the direction that we were heading. We didn't know what to make of it because we didn't see anyone on the trail that day. Well, he didn't. I'd like to begin by describing myself because I believe it's relevant to the story. I have to assume that I'm not the average author here. I'm 25, male, and a bit above average height. I've been doing sports 5 to 6 times a week since I've graduated high school. Gym, running, CrossFit, and swimming, and any team sport my friends decide to play at any given time. My favorite hobbies are mountaineering, hiking, and bouldering. I've just recently purchased a new pair of high-altitude mountaineering boots because it's near the end of summer season and they were on sale. The plan is to wear them in the Alps next summer on a few cents. I live in a European capital, one that's surrounded by wonderful nature with many trails and opportunities for hiking. I decided to break in my boots last Saturday, more specifically because it would have been my granddad's birthday and he also loved hiking before he died. These boots are overkill for these woods, but I needed to try them. I selected a nice route that's around 25 kilometers and set off at about 9 in the morning. It rained just the day before, so I expected a fair amount of mud and not so many people as they are easily scared off by the weather. Since the summer was excruciatingly hot, it was a nice change of temperature for me, especially between trees and such, where it's a few degrees cooler than in the city. In the not so distant past, my dog would have definitely joined me on this hike, but she's turning 14 this year and she doesn't enjoy long distant walks anymore. My girlfriend had to do something for work on short notice, so I knew from the moment I woke up I would be doing this hike alone. The first half of the hike was perfect. The altitude difference along the trail is minimal. I barely broke a sweat and I misjudged how many people would be out due to the storm the day before. I met at most 6 to 7 people during the first 2 to 3 hours, and most of them were mere cross-country runners. It's worth mentioning that I wasn't walking quickly. I stopped on many occasions to take pictures or study animal tracks. There are a lot of deer and wild boars in these woods. Nothing more menacing. Not animals anyway, but I won't get ahead of myself. Between 12 and 1, the path ran into an actual road, one where cars can go. This road is asphalt, but deep in the forest and can only be used to reach certain landmarks that are also in the forest, so cars seldom go here. My trail required me to take this road for a few hundred meters. As I was walking along the road, I heard a car approach from behind me. It went past me, not too quickly or too slowly. It was an older green SUV with a fresh registration. You can tell by the license plate. Probably an import. Anyway, I thought nothing of it at the time. Then I heard it come back. It drove past me for the second time, now very slowly, and I could clearly see 2 men sitting in the front seats, wearing baseball caps and sunglasses. Both had stubble and beard game going on as well. I assume they were gamekeepers, even though those cars have a crest on the hood and on both front doors. As I hike a fair amount, I know these things. I see them around quite a bit. They would also not be driving a car like this. They have jeeps which are more suitable for the forest. Still, I felt no discomfort, and again, I thought nothing of it. Then my trail left the asphalt road and began snaking into the woods again. I walked ahead serenely, gazing at trees and whatnot. Then I suddenly had the strange sensation that something or someone was behind me. The engine sound was becoming more and more clear as well. At this point, the trail was quite narrow, but if for whatever reason you'd want to drive a car on it, you could. Just about. Now when I turned around, the SUV I mentioned before was basically in my face. It was an arm's length away from me, and it stopped just as I had. I looked at the driver who was staring back, as I can only assume as he was wearing sunglasses. I calmly asked him, "What's wrong? Shall I let you go?" In a polite tone, as his window was rolled down. He didn't speak. He slowly started reversing, and he soon disappeared behind a curve. Now, I was quite uncomfortable. I also noticed that he was alone in the car, unlike earlier. I listened intently, standing still, since I wasn't sure what was going on. At this point, I was not scared, but there was a faint feeling of unease in the air, and bad thoughts began gathering in the back of my mind. I heard the car and the engine stop just behind the curve. I heard a door open and shut, but nothing from that point on. I turned around and kept walking towards my destination at a much faster pace than before. And now admittedly, I was a bit scared. I didn't understand why he didn't answer and why he just reversed and left without a word. I wasn't sure what to make of it, and I had no desire to ask him again or to see him again for that matter. I had just walked enough for these unpleasant thoughts to slowly be erased from my mind. As I had been drinking a lot of water as I usually do, I decided to take a piss. I saw a perfect spot, a very narrow path off my trail, that led quite clearly to a little hunting tower. I don't know what they're called in English. Wooden structures. A couple meters tall, very simple, where hunters can sit and wait for their prey. I walked over to the tower and put my bag down by the ladder that led up it and began pissing. I was also interested in checking Google Maps to see where I was, but since there was no signal, I decided to check my own map. I also had another sip of water. I had been camping there for a good few minutes before I headed back to the trail from where I deviated from to take a leak. Right before I arrived back to the main trail, I thought to myself how extremely quiet it was. No wind, and no noise of any kind. Absolutely nothing. This made me realize just a moment later how alone I was, except for the man who was standing maybe 50 meters away from me on the trail, in the direction where I was headed. I only saw this as soon as I stepped back on that trail. Since the small one to the tower was very well hidden by trees and you couldn't see the main trail, as it was running perpendicularly to the small one. I looked at him and I was instantly chilled to the very bone. He was dressed in tactical clothing with a baseball bat on his head. The only reason he was standing still, I believe, was a moment of surprise that I had appeared from a place where he didn't expect me to appear from. At this point, I was fully and utterly alarmed. He was holding a rifle that had a scope on it. Had this happened without the incident with the SUV, I would have probably walked on along the trail, thinking he's just a hunter. However, in light of the strange encounter with the SUV, from which the second man was missing, something in me snapped instantly. In hindsight, it's also illegal to hunt in these woods this time of year. I figured in the matter of 2 seconds that I was going to sprint through the woods until exhaustion, towards and past the tower, as it seemed natural to do at the time. If there was no malicious intent on this man's behalf, or the others, he'll just think I'm an idiot and forget about me in 2 minutes. If I'm right, it's the best call I will have ever made. And for fuck's sake, he began running towards me. Adrenaline blossoming within me, I began sprinting away. I sprinted past the tower and deep into the bushes, not sparing my legs as I was wearing shorts and a thermal jumper. I crashed through branches, small trees, and slipped on several occasions. I really did sprint until I was exhausted. It must have been several kilometers. I even crossed some smaller trails, but didn't even bother to look away. My pulse was 1,000,000,000 the whole time. I began checking my phone for a signal, but still nothing. I was already really angry at myself for not memorizing the license plate. After a while, I began power walking, but still off trail, straight ahead, in a direction that I knew would sooner or later lead me out of the woods. When my phone finally got a signal, I told the story to several people frantically, but no one took me too seriously. They said I was overreacting and whatnot. You must have misunderstood the situation. Well, I'll let you decide for yourselves if I did or not. Finally, I reached a trail that led directly to a cute little town that borders this rather large forest. It felt like eternity, but I walked the last kilometer to the main square, took off my jumper and put it in my bag. At least I looked a little different, from far away. I waited for a bus that took me back to a station near my car, rather anxiously. After the bus ride, during which I studied each car on the road, I walked back to my car, got in, and drove home. My dog welcomed me like I was coming back from a 2-year deployment. Dogs are just amazing like that. She must have felt that something shook me up. I spent the afternoon contemplating my life in the bathtub. The boots destroyed my feet, but they aren't meant to be sprinted in for large periods of time. I called the forest gamekeeper's office, and I inquired about whether they have such cars in service as the one I came across, and they do not. Their gamekeepers also don't typically work in pairs. Like 99% of the time, they are alone. I told them my story, and they took me a lot more seriously than my friends, but they assured me that the police wouldn't. No one could have been legally hunting in the area during summer either. I've been reading local news, but nothing extraordinary has been reported yet. I really hope that nothing will be reported. Gentlemen in the empty forest at lunchtime. That's not me. This happened to my roommate and I 2 years ago. When we drove into the national forest just outside of the town we live in, we go to a small college in New England, about 3 hours from any major city. For context, this forest has quite a few urban legends surrounding it, and the local community, although they do go there often, have a lot of superstitions about how to be safe while there. I had just broken up with my partner, and my roommate could sense I was feeling down. Finals were just around the corner, so she decided to help me get my mind off things, and suggested that we go to a nice spot that she had found last week, and just chill. We took a couple of beers with us, and we drove to this secluded spot in the forest. From the moment we left the main asphalt road in the forest, I saw a couple of things that unsettled me. You could see the abandoned houses of a ghost town from the higher ground the road was on, and we saw this old doll hanging from a rope on a tree. Creepy shit, but we didn't really give it a second thought and kept driving. We got to a clearing and we parked our car behind some trees, popped open the back of our SUV, and started just talking and playing music. About 10 minutes into this, 2 cars appeared from the road and parked in the clearing. My friend didn't pay them attention. Instead, she kept talking. But as I was facing them from where I sat, I couldn't stop seeing what they did. A guy popped out of each car, talked for a few minutes, and then I saw them take out a long object covered in a dark plastic bag from the back of one of the cars. This is when I noticed these guys had guns, and not like shotguns, which I see often in this town, but handguns. Then they started lighting the bag on fire. I told my friend to get down, and she turned around and saw them for the first time. Black smoke was rising from the bag, and between trying to keep my head down and steal glances at them, I saw them take out a second object and heard them shoot at it, right before they set it on fire. I don't know how long my friend and I were lying there in silence, but it was definitely enough to let the terror sink in and whisper to each other how much we loved each other, just in case this is what we thought it was. At some point, I looked up and saw that they were pointing at our car, and saw them walking into the woods, maybe trying to follow our tracks or trying to look for us. All I know is that right then, I told my friend to jump into the driver's seat and make a run for it. I shut the back door, and between that and the car starting up, the guys heard it and started running towards us, then ran towards one of the cars and hopped in. We went over a hill, and driving way above what was safe for dirt roads on a hillside, we lost them. We drove to a neighboring town and roamed around for a while, just to make sure no one was following us, before we went back to our dorm. That day, we tried to make fun of the whole situation and got really drunk, before finally breaking down and crying, for knowing that we had seen something we were not supposed to. We were at first terrified of telling anyone, but eventually did tell officers on campus, who contacted the police, but never found anything. So before I start this story, I just want to let you know that I'm French, so I apologize in advance if I make any mistakes. As I just said, I live in France, and this happened to me this summer after the lockdown ended. I went to my grandparents to spend a few weeks. Grandparents lived in a small city in the north of France, and they have a dog who's quite a big dog. When I was really young, I lived at my grandparents for a year. At the time, the dog was only a puppy. Her name is Chippy, in French, which kind of means like little devil in English, but in an affectionate way. Considering when I was living there, I played with her a lot. We are both really close, and that will have its importance later. 2 of my hobbies are long walks and running. Thus, every morning I was going out for a long walk with my dog. There's a track that follows a path through the forest, then there's a small hill, and on top of that, a big place with lots of field there. I run there a lot, so I know the place very well, and the air is fresh, and the view is quite beautiful. So I was going there with the dog every day. It was also helping my grandparents to have her doing lots of exercise. The first time we went there, nothing special happened at all. We just enjoyed our walk. It's about 6 to 7 kilometers, so basically an hour walk for us. The next day, when we arrived on top of the hill, in the field, it was probably around 10 p.m., but there was still some light because it's summer. There were 3 other persons walking in the fields, and they were younger than me, probably 15 to 16. I also noticed that they were smoking, so my guess was that they used to come here so they couldn't be seen by their parents. We just went past them though. I greeted them and they greeted back. Once again, nothing special there. For about a week straight, I did this whole walk around the same time, 10 p.m., and every time I passed by those 3 guys, with nothing special happening, and it was perfectly fine to me this way. The second week though, as usual, I went for the walk with my dog, and arrived at the fields. There was only one of those 3 boys this time, and he wasn't smoking. When he saw me, I was at the entrance of the field just after the little hill climb, so the entrance of the forest was just behind me. He did a sign with his hand to catch my attention and asked if I had a lighter, which I actually did have in my pocket. I told him, yeah, sure. So he walked to me, with both of his hands in the pockets of his hoodie. When he came near, for some reason I felt a shiver. It's crazy how sometimes your instinct knows there's a problem, but you don't listen to it because nothing looks weird to you. I handed over the lighter when he passed by. At that moment, my dog was staring at him. Then everything happened really fast. He did a really fast movement with his hand, coming from the hoodie, and I only saw something shining. I just had a reflex of throwing myself back, so hard that I fell down. I just realized that it was a knife he was holding, and he just tried to stab me. What saved me is my dog, God bless her. When she saw the guy trying to stab me, she jumped on him and he fell down. As I said before, very big dog. I immediately got up on my feet and heard something from behind me. From the entrance of the forest, I saw 2 guys wearing animal masks running to me. They were probably the 2 friends. In this moment, your brain sort of acts for itself. Me and Chippy started running immediately as fast as we could. But I heard the worst possible thing from the guy who got up as well. Catch him. Don't let him go. At this moment, I was totally terrified. I was just running and running. I was hearing them running behind me. I was only thinking, how long will they follow me, and who the hell are they? This was the first time I was really happy to be a runner. I was clearly faster than those guys, and that totally saved me, because they chased for something that felt like an eternity to me. Fortunately, at the end of the field, there's another entrance to the forest, and this time, it's a descent with the road at the end. I heard the steps of 3 guys vanishing as I arrived at the end of the forest, though I didn't stop running until I arrived at my grandparents' house and locked myself in the house. I caught a big breath and gave my dog a huge hug. I saw in her eyes that she totally understood what happened, and I had never been so happy to have her in my life. After that, I told everything to my grandparents, and we called the police, but they didn't find anyone. I don't know what these guys wanted, but the animal mask really makes me think about some kind of Satanists. I really don't want to know anyway. I still do long walks with Chippy the hero dog, and I just go earlier now and to places with a little bit more people.